FOMO is real. How the fear of missing out affects your health. Your physical, mental, and emotional state may be at risk. You're late night scrolling through Instagram, TikTok, and suddenly you stumble on a series of photos or videos of your friends and family having fun without you. You ask yourself, why didn't they invite me? Did they just forget to include me? And then just as quickly, you're falling down a rabbit hole of trying to make sense of it all, wondering what you did wrong, wishing you had been included, scrolling through their social media profiles to find clues for what made them leave you out in the first place. Ultimately, you're left simmering in sadness, guilt, or shame because you've developed a fear of missing out. Fear of missing out, or the fear of missing out, has become all too prevalent over the last couple of decades. It's an experience that many of us are familiar with, and while it's directly related to our self-esteem and self-worth, it also has a direct effect on our physical, mental, and emotional health. And how could it not? When everyone else around you is having fun without you, what can you do to feel good about where you're at and what you're going to do on your own? Clinical health psychologist Amy Sullivan breaks down all the nuances of FOMO and shares advice on how to avoid it or how to manage it when it inevitably creeps up. So FOMO is not just limited to social media. This is actually a part of addiction. Part of addiction is feeling you're going to miss out. So even if you have an addiction to food, for example, if I'm at the movie theater, I used to always get 2 oatmeal and 2 chocolate chip, and I couldn't resist. Anytime I was at a movie, I knew that trio was there. I would maybe make it maybe a half hour into the movie, but there was always this sense of missing out. Like, now's my chance. If I don't get these cookies now, I'm never gonna get these cookies. And so we may also feel this at like social gatherings. When it comes there in front of you, you may have this sense of, well, I better, even if I don't want to eat one of these, I better get one because it's going to be gone in a second. It's going to pass by me. So this FOMO is a part of addiction, a feeling that you may miss out. And so the social aspect makes it even stronger because you want to kind of feel like you're in the loop. You know, if you hear people talking about something and you don't understand what they're talking about, it could make you want to go and, like it says, start binging, scrolling, trying to figure out what's what so that you can be in the know and be a part of the conversation in the future. So what is FOMO? FOMO, or the fear of missing out, refers to the feeling of perception that other people are having fun, experiencing new things, or living a better life than you. And while this most often pops up when you see or perceive these characteristics in people you love and you're close with, it can also occur with parasocial relationships. When you see people you don't know, but follow on social media doing really cool things you wish you were doing, it can have a lasting impact on how you feel about yourself. This used to mostly affect women. Women tend to want to keep up with the Joneses and compete with each other. They say even women look at each other more than men look at women because women are always looking at each other, judging each other. But they're trying to push that now with the men as well, with this whole red pill movement. They're trying to get men to be jealous of each other or compete with each other in dunya. So there was a little bit of this in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, but now with social media, it's even more prevalent because we have, we can see hundreds of people a day, whereas in real life, you don't really see that many people. And if you do, they're all not fake. They look the way they do on social media. With the advancements of social media, people are feeling like they can't escape FOMO, says Dr. Sullivan. We have access to everything 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and most people are on multiple platforms. Because of this, people are feeling like they're either missing out or they're not doing enough to reach their full potential. FOMO is entirely dependent on social media. Though social media is perhaps FOMO's biggest culprit, FOMO can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. An athlete who frequently sees someone they look up to working out in the gym 4 to 5 days a week may experience stress associated with the belief that they're not able to commit to the time or keep up with such high standards. Someone who enjoys reading may become triggered by someone else's long list of books they've read over the course of a year and may feel as though they're not smart enough, educated enough, or able to maintain that level of comprehension. Yeah, this is more of a personality thing. I don't think a lot of people would see it that way. But if you are addicted to social media, you could very well have a lot of these issues because you're so caught up in the alternate reality that you just find yourself comparing yourself to everyone for everything. Someone who wishes to be more socially involved or active might feel left out, anxious, or like they're not doing enough whenever they see or hear about other people traveling, going on adventures, and experiencing things they've never experienced in their own lives. In many ways, modern-day FOMO is similar to the long-time phenomenon known as keeping up with the Joneses, the pressure of having to meet or exceed your neighbor's social status, wealth, and popularity. Yeah, this was a known thing since forever. I think it was first mentioned like in the 40s or 50s. So what it would be was like someone would look out of their window and see the neighbors have this new car. So now they feel like they need a new car. And even a lot of people, when they buy houses, they're buying houses with the intention of how they're going to entertain people in this house. And like a big part of their buying decision is entertaining people. You know, they want to be able to show off and things like that. So like in the Deen, alhamdulillah, we know that when we want to aspire to be a certain type of way, we look at more people who are more religious than us, and we try to compete with them in their religiosity. And when it comes to the dunya, we look at people who have less than us so that we can appreciate where we are. But today, unfortunately, we look at people who have more than us, and we tend to discredit or ignore those who are more religious than us, apparently religious. I mean, no one really knows who's religious. Only Allah knows, but you get what I'm saying. So why does FOMO happen? FOMO can affect anyone, but certain people are at higher risk of FOMO if they have an underlying mental health condition or have low self-esteem. Of course, social media isn't all that bad, but it can be particularly harmful if your personal relationship with your body image is in disarray. And in particular, anxiety disorder and depression both lend themselves to experiencing FOMO more frequently and with longer lasting effects. So addiction is the root cause of a lot of this. So if you have an addiction to social media, it's just a matter of time before these things start affecting you. Depression, anxiety, FOMO, not eating, competing, all these kind of issues, not getting enough sleep. This is all a consequence of being addicted to social media. What concerns me is people who are predisposed to emotional disorders like anxiety or depression typically withdraw or avoid situations, and their way of connecting with others may be through social media, notes Dr. Sullivan. The human experience is all about connection, so we have an innate need to connect. But in the instance of a person with anxiety or depression, the majority of their connection may be through social media. Yeah, and I would highly suggest if you're going to tackle an addiction, if you're going to try to cut back on social media, supplement with a healthy diet. Make sure you're not eating a lot of sugar. All these things are hand in hand. You know, usually gluttony and lust and scrolling, they all kind of go hand in hand. So make sure that you try to work on your physical and mental health while working on cutting back social media. Because if your brain's not healthy, it's just not going to have the energy to have willpower. So always work with always work on your diet along with your addiction to try to cut out the addiction. A 2017 study correlated more daily social media use with a higher chance of having an anxiety disorder, while a 2022 study suggests depressive and anxious symptoms worsen the longer we spend on social media. While social media likely isn't going anywhere anytime soon, how we use it and how often we use it certainly has a direct impact on our ability to experience FOMO. The depressive and anxious from this 2022 study, or survey, comes from the lockdowns. So during lockdowns, everyone was locked in their homes and forced to be on the internet. So by doing that, not only did more people become addicted to social media, but even younger kids who normally wouldn't have access to the internet now had access to the internet because their schools were remote. And then add to that, having abusive parents locked in the homes with the kids. It was just a big, perfect storm of trauma for millions of families. When we have basic needs that are unmet and we depend on social media use to satisfy those needs, it's likely compounds the severity of symptoms we're experiencing. Studies also suggest that FOMO is a negative emotional state resulting from unmet social relatedness needs. FOMO is probably the most hurtful in teenagers or younger adults, specifically because they are trying to figure out where they fit in life and what groups they fit into. Yeah, and kids do want to fit in. This is just natural. We're all social creatures. We all yearn for community. And so kids are at school 8 hours a day. They want to fit in. So this is something to keep in mind. And then when they're on social media, that just adds to wanting to fit in. But now they're trying to fit in with a bunch of fake people. How does FOMO affect your health? The fear of missing out can have a direct impact on your physical, mental, and emotional health. You might physically experience some symptoms associated with the anxiety that include stomach tension and nausea, headaches, body aches and pain, heart palpitations and increased heart rate, feelings of emotional distress. Mentally and emotionally, you might experience an increase in intrusive thoughts. You might even become consumed by the cycle of negative self-talk, making it more difficult to manage and believe in your own sense of self-worth and self-esteem. If at any point any of the symptoms become increasingly disruptive, it's important that you ask for help. From a psychological standpoint, when it starts to impact your daily life, we know there's an issue. And if you're unable to stop even at that point, then you know you have an addiction. And that's any domain of life: social interactions, athletics, school, relationships, states, Dr. Sullivan. Whatever it might be, if any aspect of your life is disrupted, we need to be able to identify the root of the problem and any potential solutions that can help. Tips to overcome and deal with FOMO. So, is the solution to FOMO as simple as taking a break from social media, or are there other ways you can learn to cope with stress associated with online use? Let's see if they say keep using social media without saying keep using social media. What we have to do is set up appropriate limits and do a value-based assessment of our goals and what helps us to achieve those goals, including our use of social media. Some helpful solutions for avoiding and managing FOMO include recognizing your feelings and setting limits. When we start to feel physical or psychological symptoms, we know it's time to stand up and take a break. We have to set limits. This can look like deactivating your social media account, saving social media involvement for weekends when it's not disrupting your work, or inputting time limits on your smartphone so you can only access certain apps for a limited amount of time within a 24-hour period. If you have a younger adolescent child at home and you're just starting to introduce them to social media, it's very important as a parent to set these limits for the child. Sometimes it can be very difficult for a child to recognize those triggers in themselves. Children are not going to recognize those triggers in themselves. Even teenagers themselves say that you probably shouldn't give your child social media access until at least 16. Because they're just not capable of controlling impulses or self-restraint for the most part. That's what the parents are for. Identify your triggers. Sometimes FOMO can be paralyzing, says Dr. Sullivan. Pulls you into this rabbit hole and paralyzes you. For this reason, if you identify what your triggers are, you can work towards avoiding these triggers or prepare yourself for how to react when those triggers occur. For example, if you see someone who you know is in your friend group and they're hanging out with someone else and you know that it's going to trigger you, you need to make sure you do not search for those types of things on social media and that you're reaching out to those friends to address your concerns whenever they surface. Overall, try not to be jealous and instead be grateful that your friends have people who care about them and know that the same is true for you. Develop your sense of self. Developing your sense of self is vitally important in all stages of your life. When we start to look at ourselves as more complex individuals, we recognize what we bring to the world and to our relationships, and we recognize our worth. It's also important to recognize what our values are and what our interests are, and sometimes it's okay if those values don't align with other people, especially if they're important to us. Alhamdulillah, being Muslim, we all have the same values, inshallah. It's so important to gain knowledge of the deen so that we're all on the same page. You can do this by taking inventory of your values by way of doing a value-based assessment. Make a list of all the things that bring you joy, that make you feel confident, that make you feel good about yourself and the way you move through the world around you. Then make a list of all the things that don't serve you, the things that make you feel bad about yourself, harm you, or make you feel like you're not good enough. It's also important to make sure that the people you are following, the people you seem to be looking up to, are they living a halal lifestyle? This is very important. You don't want to compete with people and doing haram. So that should be the number one thing. By doing this, you can physically discover all the things that you should hold on to and perhaps interact with a bit more, and all the things you may need to cut out of your life or adjust the way you interact with them. We need to make sure young people especially understand their worth, understand what fills their bucket, understand what makes them who they are, what brings value, what brings joy, and what motivates them, so that we know themselves deeply and are not spending time comparing themselves to other people, thus bringing down their self-worth. Another thing is to also just, as long as we're engaged with our children as much as possible, giving them our undivided attention and doing things with them, then they won't have a need to be on social media as much. They may not even be on it at all. Usually addiction comes as a result of trying to fill some type of void, and neglect is one of the biggest ones in our ummah, unfortunately. Evaluate the reality of social media. Out of FOMO come other things like JOMO, the joy of missing out, and ROMO, the reality of missing out. And these are funny acronyms. And it's that reality piece that's an important part to remember. what you see online is just a sliver of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Very true. Most of the time, we're only seeing half the picture. We're not always seeing the reality of what's happening behind the scenes. We all have struggles and challenges that we're faced with. We have to ask ourselves, are we evaluating a real situation, or is it just half the picture? It is a sliver of the picture. It's kind of like celebrities. When a celebrity's in front of a camera, they put on a persona. They're not going to show you their true colors. They're not going to show you their real self unless, they're having a breakdown or something, but they always put on an act. And so I know this from personal experience, knowing people in that space. They're not happy, unfortunately, but on camera, you wouldn't know otherwise. Seek assistance from a psychologist. You can embrace a lot of these management tools on your own, but sometimes situations can be a bit more complex, especially if you're not sure where to start. A psychologist who specializes in interpersonal therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy can be helpful with managing FOMO and making sure that you're chasing your dreams in reality and not online. After all, when you fear you're missing out, it feels good knowing you have someone on your team who understands your experience. Seeking help from someone who specializes in mental health treatment is always a good idea. Interpersonal therapy is an exceptional way to understand you as an individual and how you relate to the world. Cognitive behavioral therapy is good for more physiological symptoms and learning to manage cognitive distortions and ruminating thoughts. So yeah, inshallah, a lot of this again comes from just overuse, social media, which can be easy. A lot of the things, especially in the West, are put forward because they know that they have addictive potential. And so because a lot of people, if not most people in the West, were traumatized as children or by their environment, by their caregivers or parents, this makes us more susceptible to addiction. So we're constantly bombarded with addictive foods and substances and drugs and behaviors that it can become overwhelming. And so this is just one aspect. This is usually and most likely someone who's addicted to social media, someone who's on there constantly. They're so engulfed in that false reality that it becomes their reality. So that becomes their norm. And so just to feel normal, they feel they have to look a certain way, know certain things, know certain jokes, to fit in. So inshallah, keep this in mind, especially if you have kids or if you're a teen or a youth, make sure you try to, be mindful, be in the moment, try not to get caught up in all of these things. Make sure you're learning the deen. This will definitely put things into perspective. Just the thing is just to be grounded in reality as much as possible. So inshallah, this has been beneficial. Subscribe, like, ring the bell if you want notifications. And inshallah, until next time, may Allah reward you for being curious and keep tying your camel. Assalamu alaikum.